Okay, here's an attempt to show you how the quadratic formula is used. I'm looking at page 406, number 3. It says solve x squared minus 7x minus 18 equals 0. And that's a quadratic equation, and it's set at 0, so what we're actually doing is finding the roots of the equation, those numbers that we can plug in that would make everything equal to 0. So there could be up to 2 answers in this situation. We'll find out what those answers are and check them to make sure it works. Okay, so there's more than one way to think about it. We might think about factoring this quadratic equation into 2 binomial factors. So I set up a rectangle to see if I could figure out some numbers that where I'd put the first term as x squared, the last term is negative 18. And I'm trying to think of 2 numbers, and as we recall, those 2 numbers, if it was to be a perfect square, they'd have to add up to negative 7x and also be factors of negative 18. So we're trying to think about numbers that might work. We'll get back to that because we haven't hit that so much yet, but we do definitely have a thing on our side called the quadratic formula. And so what looks like we're doing here is taking and making sure that we know what the A, B, and C are, and we remember how to find those 3 numbers, remembering that we have negative 7 where we see things like a negative before the 7. So it does have an impact on how we solve these things. Then we can think about the way that the quadratic formula works. If x squared plus bx plus c is equal to 0, then x is equal to negative b plus or minus, and that's a plus or minus meaning there could be 2 answers. The square root of b squared minus 4ac, that's all over 2a. So the first step is to just plug in those numbers, a, b, and c, into that formula, remembering that there are going to be some negative signs where if it says negative b, that means we're talking about a negative 7. Things like that. We have to make sure that we honor those negative signs. So we have negative 7 plus or minus the square root of negative 7 squared minus 4 times 1 times negative 18 over 2 multiplied by 1. When we simplify, we're making sure that we can simplify things right away. That negative 7 becomes 7 plus or minus. And we remember we have to think about coming up with a definite the simplification of what's inside this square root sign, as that is considered parentheses. And this is an exponential relationship right here. So we are going ahead and simplifying that. So we look what's inside the numbers. Negative 7 squared equals 49 minus a negative 72, remembering that we're talking about 3 numbers that are being multiplied. 4 times 1 times negative 18 giving us negative 72, and remember that we are subtracting that, so it's negative 72, which ultimately becomes adding. And after we take care of that, we still have a plus or minus to deal with. 7 plus or minus the square root of 121. All that stuff over 2. So this is where we come up with 2 different answers. It becomes 7 plus 11, 7 minus 11. All of those both over 2. So 7 plus 11 over 2 is 9. 7 minus 11 over 2 becomes negative 2. What do we do with those answers? We got to check our work. So making sure that we check on our work, we're plugging in those numbers into the original formula, and we're checking to see there's where it says x squared minus 7x minus 18 is equal to 0. We're checking to make sure that the numbers that we found, if we plug them in correctly, are going to be actually equal to 0. And there's our check. We also check the negative 2, remembering that negative 2 squared is a positive 4, and as it uses out over here, it tends to be positive 4 plus 14 minus 18. Sure enough, that is also 0. Anyway, so there's a good use of the quadratic formula, and let's put it to good work.